Next item up is agenda item 33, and it's an item regarding an order authorizing short-term water withdrawals by Florida Power and Light, and Sharon's going to update us on that.
Good afternoon, Board. It's difficult to follow that item, but this is also a very important item. We have a situation down near the Turkey Point nuclear project where FP&L's cooling canal system, which was constructed back in the early 70s, the temperature and the salinity keep going up, and we want to avoid the emergency situation that occurred last year. At this point in time, the way this system is designed, there's no way for surface water inflows or outflows to recharge the system. The only recharge it receives is from rainfall or from saline groundwater seepage. And as a matter of fact, last year at this time, this whole area only received 41 inches of rain when the average annual rainfall at the structure closest was about 50 inches. So there was sort of an area of very low rainfall here, which is exacerbating the salinity problem. There's a number of operational issues that have come to play. The temperatures in this closed canal system usually start to rise in late spring. The Nuclear Regulatory Commission has a factor of 104 degrees Fahrenheit. If the temperature goes above that, they have to shut down certain components of the reactors. The increasing evaporation in this area is causing an increase in the salinity. And if you recall last summer, in August of 2014, this board issued an emergency order to allow FP&L to divert water from the C-103 basin that went into the L-31E canal to put it into these cooling canal systems to help drop the temperature and reduce the salinities. And that did work. There was a reduction in the salinity and in the temperatures. FP&L had intended to use a system of Floridan aquifer wells that would provide about 14 million gallons per day as their long-term solution to correct this problem. However, right now there are some objections to the use of those wells, so that is on hold, and until those objections are resolved, they are looking for a temporary interim step. So they've come in to ask for authorization to provide this water to cool down the closed canal system. You'll recall that back in 2013, and I know some of you were not here then, but as we go through the water reservation process, there was a reservation of waters made for the nearshore Central Biscayne Bay area. And the southernmost reach of L-31Es, which I'm showing here with the cursor, the reservation distributed across that reach was about 504 acre-feet per day. And this is because the intent of the overall Biscayne Bay coastal wetlands projects is to be redistributing the flow in a more natural pattern the way it was before the advent of the Southgate conveyance system. In this short-term withdrawal authorization, FPL is prohibited from withdrawing and using water from that system that's reserved for fish and wildlife for the nearshore Central Biscayne Bay. The only water that's going to be available to them for the purpose of this order is water which is in excess of those flows that are reserved for the protection of fish and wildlife. We're coming up with and have worked together, and I do want to mention that by my last reckoning, there were more than 29 conference calls, face-to-face meetings, internal caucuses, and writing sessions to come up with the proposed order, the proposed final order that we're asking you to approve today to get to this point. And concerns were expressed both by environmental entities and by FP&L as we move back and forth to try to arrive at something that could be workable. Some of those groups still may have concerns that they may speak to you about after my presentation. But we came up with a couple of steps for how we're going to determine availability of this water. The first step was a calendar constraint, stating that it would be seasonal withdrawals only for the 2-year period from June 1st to November 30th of 2015, and then next year, 2016, the same time period, June 1st to November 30th. The second step in assessing this criteria was determining the excess available from the L-31 East Canal system. And the way that's going to be done is each day there will start at midnight. And at midnight, the pumps will go on, at midnight we will measure flows, direct flows in these three structures, and they will get that data directly from our system that we will post it to a website. There will be total transparency for anyone to be able to see what the flows are. FP&L will determine when that amount has reached 504 acre-feet or more. So when the full reservation amount has been delivered, only after that point would they be able to authorize a withdrawal from the pumping system. And each day the withdrawals have to terminate at 11:59 p.m. to prepare for the next day to make sure that that delivery of the reservation ensues. So if you could see a picture of it here, what it looks like, here's the top part of the cooling canal system, and it extends down into this area. The three structures along this reach of the L-31 East, and these structures are capturing water from this canal here, which is the C-103 basin. The sum of the flows from those three structures must exceed the reservation each day before any water can be diverted to the temporary pumps and into the cooling canal system. We also want to prevent over-withdrawals, like going over the amount that they could take or causing undesired local drawdowns. So because of that, we have to make sure that whatever volume is taken from that basin into the L-31 East, that must exceed the amount that's taken out of the L-31 East into the cooling canal system. So the way you do that is you have a protocol and you closely coordinate when the pumps turn on and off. So basically, the northern pumps will always start at least 5 minutes before the pumps that are at the south end that discharge into the cooling canal system. And conversely, at the end of the day, the south pumps have to turn off first, and then the north pumps will cease within about 5 minutes of that time. This is a schematic that shows you the structures of interest and the location of these temporary pumping facilities. This is the northern pumps here, shown at the terminus of the Florida City Canal, and the southern pumps are shown here. There will be temporary piping that will go across this area right here, discharging the water into the northern portion of the cooling canal system. The order has a number of requirements. It's about 20 pages long. There's a lot of detail in there. But basically, the flows will be available on the district webpage. That will be transparent to anyone who wants to look at them. FP&L is responsible for accessing the data and performing the appropriate calculations. We have very extensive monitoring and reporting requirements in this order. They must generate detailed reports which will include the water availability determination for each day, the pump usage and timing, the amount of water that was actually diverted to the cooling canal system, temperature and salinity data within the cooling canal system, and weekly summary reports, which basically be a summary. The most important thing to know is how much water was going into the system, because we already know during this quasi-real-time process that all of the delivery of the reservation will have taken place before anything can be diverted. There are some special pump station criteria. We do reserve the right to require termination of pumping at any time within 2 hours of receipt of an oral or written request. FP&L will be responsible for coordinating the pumping at both stations, and they have to prepare for us a storm or hurricane contingency plan, because that equipment would be out there, and in the event of a major storm, we want to make sure that things are secured. For the pumps themselves, they will be required to be staffed on site 24 hours a day. They will not be left unattended. They will have people there to monitor the operation of the pumps, the fuel level, the safety, and then the totalizing flow meters. All of this will be done by having people there 24/7. We also are requiring that they complete a discharge rating curve for the pumps prior to the operation, because when you have two different pumps, you want to know what is the percent of accuracy of each pump, because you have a plus or minus factor. You want to know exactly what it is, because with that information, we'll be able to hone in on avoiding the overpumping by when pumps turn on and off. So it's very important that we have that data. And they will be required to calibrate the totalizing flow meters. So with that summary, we recommend that the board enter into an order that authorizes these short-term water withdrawals by Florida Power and Light from the L-31E Canal system down in Miami-Dade County, Florida. And I do believe there'll be a number of comments.
Thank you, Sharon. Any board questions for Sharon? Mr. Barber.
Sharon, but based on past records, do you think this will succeed?
Yes, I do think it will succeed because last year they used the system, this approach, when they had already reached an emergency stage from August to October, and there was a significant reduction in the salinity and the temperature in the cooling canals. They're not at the point of the emergency yet, which is why they came in early, because they want to avoid being in the emergency. They wanted to have everything in place before the start, June 1, of the wet season. And because they don't have full access to be able to drill and utilize the Florida and aquifer wells right now because of the objections, and that has to be resolved before they can do that, they have come in to request this approach.
But there is sufficient water to...
I believe that there is sufficient water, and in addition, in the period from October 14th to November 30th is traditionally the ag drawdown that's done in the southern portion of the South Dade conveyance system, and that generates a lot of water that would be going out. So I think that in addition, that period of time will be very helpful. And of course, anything natural that happens, such as rainfall, is very helpful. But until you know exactly what the rainfall is going to be, I mean, this whole system down there is driven by rainfall, obviously.
Thank you, and thanks for the effort you've put into this.
Well, I do want to thank the team of Paul Linton, Jennifer Brown, Simon Sunderland, Stephen Menberg, John Shaw, and Maria Clemente, because they're the ones that did the lion's share of the work. So thank you to those folks.
That sounded like an Oscar speech, and you're going to forget somebody when you do that.
I just was thinking to myself.
You started, and you're like, oh, I'm going to forget somebody. Ms. Batchelor.
Sharon, thank you for your report. Two questions. One, this order, will it have a quantifiable benefit for the wildlife? Because I know those waters get really hot. Have they determined that this will have a real upside for the animals? And number two, what is FPL doing so this doesn't really become a repeated request? Because they really do need to find their own solution to this.
Yes. Regarding the first question, I am not a wildlife expert, and we didn't pull in any wildlife experts to find out the specific impacts of the salinity. But I do know, and I've been told by biologists here on the staff, that the salinities were getting so high last year that it would probably be very detrimental to wildlife. So we want to avoid that. The salinity right now is close to 89 practical salinity units. That's very salty. If you were to swim in that right now, you'd be bobbing around like a cork if you weren't bitten by a crocodile first. But the salinity needs to come down. It's too high, and it's only going to get higher as we go through the summer. With increasing temperatures and evaporation, salinity is going to increase. And salinity and temperature are intimately linked. You can't separate them. Regarding FP&L and what they are going to do over the long term, I think their first intent is to resolve issues associated with the site certification agreement on installation of the Florida and aquifer wells. So there's legal issues going on right there. I know that they are talking about other types of projects and issues, and I think it would be best if they come up to speak that they could share what they are, because I don't want to speak for them on that. But I do know that they wish to have the long-term solution in place of the Floridan wells. And we did do an assessment of the Floridan wells some time ago when that permit came through with detailed modeling and analysis, and we felt that that was a safe and reliable solution. the technical staff here. However, it is under objection, so that will have to remain on hold until it is resolved through the Chapter 120, process.
One more, if I may. What assurances do we have that they won't be repeating this request after 2 years again?
The only assurance that I could think of, which would be an important one, is if they resolve the issues associated with the Floridan wells and get to install those wells and operate them, I believe that those wells will solve this problem for the long term. So if they have that long-term solution in play, installed in the ground, I don't think they should need to come back for something like this again.
All right.
But they have to have something because of the increasing temperatures and salinities.
All right, thank you, Sharon.
Mr. Moran?
Thank you, Sharon. My question is, if we don't help them with this, to alleviate the problem, is the worst-case scenario that these reactors would have to be shut down and there would be a brownout or power shortage in Miami-Dade?
If we don't help them with this temporary solution, they would have certain options to request expedited emergency hearings and so on. And in the meantime, there would be resource impacts because increasing salinity would create very dense salt water, which has a very high specific gravity, and it will start to sink down, and then it will start to move and follow the path of least resistance, which could impact other uses in the area. I really can't speak to which units would have to be shut down. I suspect I know, but I would prefer that they would answer that question. But I certainly, if they cannot operate the plant, if they violate the NRC criteria, then yes, they would have to shut down 2 units. If it goes above 104 degrees Fahrenheit.
Thank you, Sharon. Any further board comments or questions?
Just want to be clear. Would you mind walking me back through again the quantities that we're talking about over the period of time, Sharon?
Yes, basically, we are talking about 504 acre-feet per day. That is the reservation that has to go out to Biscayne Bay and Biscayne National Park before any water is taken.
Okay.
So anything
So that's the
in excess of that,
MFL, and so it's anything over
that's the reservation.
Okay, and so over that, then is it in a 24-hour
Well, actually,
period?
there's a limitation on facilities. Anything over that, they would be able to capture, but the pumps that they are proposing for this operation have a 100 million gallon per day capacity, which is about 300 acre feet. So they're limited in the size of the pumps that they have, plus they're limited by what time the reservation amount is reached. Let's take a hypothetical scenario that it was raining a little bit, then it stopped, and at midnight the water was allowed to go out to Biscayne Bay, and let's say it didn't reach 504 acre feet until 2 p.m. They wouldn't be able to start pumping until 2:01 p.m., and they have to turn off at 11:59. So even though you would have a 100 million gallon per day capacity, that would be assuming a 24-hour day. So they're limited by the size of the pumps and by the number of hours they have to pump. And it all depends on the local conditions of when it rains and when it doesn't and how much water is leaving that C-103 basin.
So then the MFL clock starts at midnight.
The reservation, well, that's really not the reservation clock. That's more the clock for this order.
Okay.
Because we can provide data on an hourly basis, and we can look at it accumulating. They're going to be collecting data, and their pumps have totalizing flow meters. So we're always going to know, what has been going on both through our canals and through their pumps. So it's easiest when you do anything in operations to always compare to the same datum. So if we go midnight to 11:59 every day, everybody knows where we are. We know where we are in the day and what is going on.
Yep. And then finally, I'll echo the tremendous amount of coordination and collaboration that's gone into putting solutions forward. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Mr. Powers.
Thank you, Sharon. Any further board questions or comments for Sharon? If not, I know we've got some public comment.
Yes, Mr. Chair, we have 11. Tabitha Kale, followed by Ann Call.
We're getting good at public comment now.
Got it now.
Tabitha, welcome.
Hi, hello again. Tabitha Kale from Audubon, Florida. I just wanted to note that we were glad to see that this was changed from the original request for 20 years to a much shorter time period of 2 years. We want to make sure that this remains a short-term order. And again, just reiterate Sandy's point that FPL really should be responsible for figuring out what the cause of this problem is so they can develop a more effective long-term solution for this with water supplies that are more sustainable. Again, we want to make sure we're very pleased to see that the minimum amount of water needed for the Biscayne Bay Reservation will be kept in place. We know that Biscayne Bay needs all the water it can get. And again, part of our concern in terms of making sure that this is temporary is we know the water that they're going to be using during this 2-year period is the water that's going to be needed in the future for Biscayne Bay Phase 2. So we want to make sure that that water will be protected for the future SERP project and remain available for that. And we just hope that the future solution beyond the 2 years of this order will be from a more sustainable source that won't be taking away water that Biscayne Bay needs. Thank you.
Thank you. Jackie.
And cool. I just wanted to say that with 2 more reactors being proposed for this facility, my concern would be what will happen when those reactors come online. They're already having problems with the cooling canals. There are other solutions that are more expensive. That, to me, is the crux of it, and FPNL needs to be forced to be in a better position to find a permanent solution to this. If Fukushima tells us anything, having a nuclear power plant on the edge of the ocean is not a good idea, and cooling was their problem, and this is very concerning. Sorry that all these other people left, because this is much more concerning, I think.
Thank you.
Alex Larson, followed by Al Mafado.
Alex, welcome back.
The big lie is that you keep raising the bar. Now, you all are new, but they've been raising this since the 70s. The board chair of this board years ago said, "What don't you understand, Mrs. Larson? Power plants will get water before people. This is a crime. Do not give them another drop. This is a problem. That plant is put together with paper mache and toothpicks. It's melting down. It's boiling the water. It's killing the crocodiles. Stop letting them raise the bar, because that's what we're doing." I mean, the lies behind this, it's hell no. Hell no, no more. You know, this corporation, everybody says FPL's great. They're not. They forgot about maintenance and people long ago when Bush Sr. was in office. So this has been continuous. You know, I'm ashamed. Rosa doesn't even come anymore, guys, because she's so ashamed of us, you know, as a collective. But they are. They don't deserve this. They're going to police themselves? Yeah, right. They're not policing themselves. And this is, oh, the lights, there'll be a brownout. Well, guess what? I'd rather have a brownout than my kids dying of cancer. That's my choice. This is a ridiculous area. It's a ridiculous, the whole thing is ridiculous. They want to build 2 more reactors, and they can't take care of their other children. That's ridiculous. This is something you should not do. This is an absolute. You know, I'm not kidding you. It was Kevin McCarty. Everybody who worked here witnessed it. And the lie is they've been raising the bar since the 70s. So make them do their job. Let them get water from the ocean. Florida Bay's in a lot of trouble in that. I'll bring it up later in another agenda item, but don't do this. Do not let them do this. Please.
Thank you, Alex.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and Board. Al Malafato with the law firm Lewis, Longman & Walker, and I'm here on behalf of Atlantic Civil. We are opposing staff's recommendation. I'd like to, if I can, allow the rest of my time to my partner, Steve Walker, who has a presentation to make. And he has a card in.
That's fine. Thank you.
Drew Martin, I think Drew's left. Martha Musgrove.
Martha, welcome back.
Thank you. Martha Musgrove, Florida Wildlife Federation, and I will just reiterate what I had said earlier today, that Florida Wildlife Federation supports the negotiations that have taken place with Tropical Audubon Society and the Everglades Law Center, and I believe the National Parks and Conservation Association. In terms of the requirements for this permit, we are concerned about the situation for crocodiles, which remain an endangered species. We know of at least one death. We think there were other deaths, and that this is a serious problem. We do think Florida Power and Light does have to perhaps redesign the system. We'll know if we continue on a emergency basis, but not on a 20-year permit. Thank you.
Thank you, Martha.
Laura Reynolds, followed by Matthew Schwartz.
Laura, welcome back.
Thank you. I can't imagine talking about this in just 2 minutes, so bear with me. Unfortunately, NPCA is at an all-day retreat, and so could not be here, and Everglades Law Center had to leave because I think they were exhausted. I gave you a letter from Everglades Law Center, NPCA, and Tropical Audubon Society. And first of all, I wanted to thank Sharon Trost personally for all the work that you've done to try to get us to a place that we're all comfortable. She really tried to work with all sides here to get us to an order that was appropriate. And in our particular concern, we want to parse out the difference between an emergency use and the long-term solution. And as you know, we were asking you to enforce your fifth supplemental agreement. We opposed the administrative order. And the reason that we've done that is we feel the freshening plan that they have in place to reach 34 PSU within the canals is really going to exacerbate the pollution, not cut off the source of pollution. Right now, this system is loading our aquifer with salt, and we're using a ton of water in that area. And so we're asking for a holistic approach where you're looking at all the sources of water, and I know that Steve Walker will get into some of those conflicting issues. But you can bet that the current operations there are in direct conflict with at least 2 Everglades restoration projects, Biscayne Bay Coastal Wetlands, which I gave you a graphic of, in addition to C-111. So what we asked for was an emergency order that was tied to temperature, because NRC wants them to stay below 104 degrees Fahrenheit. So use the water to operate safely, but let's make sure we give Biscayne Bay the water that it needs. We don't feel the reservation that's in place for Phase 1 is enough. Remember, Alternative O, according to the park, requires up to 980 CFS, and we are actually way below that at 256. Is that right? 254. So we don't think that's enough to keep Biscayne Bay from reaching those high salinities. So all we're asking is this order be tabled to the next board meeting, that we figure out emergency language so that we can make sure that we're not giving them the water that Biscayne needs. We understand we want FPL to operate safely. However, those long-term freshening issues need to be resolved in the hearing scheduled for July. We have to parse out those issues of apples and oranges, short-term emergency use versus long-term freshening and the whole plan. And that hasn't been identified yet. So we're asking you, there's no rush. This won't start until June 1st. So if you wouldn't mind additional negotiations with Sharon, FPL, and the other parties, I would really appreciate the extra time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Matthew Schwartz, followed by Ed Swarkon.
Good afternoon again, Commissioners. Just some brief comments. I happen to be here at the moment for another issue, but since I'm here, I will give you some thoughts about this project. First of all, my organization is deeply opposed to the expansion of the Turkey Point plant, with the 2 new nuclear reactors being planned. Those are supposed to be cooled with, I forget exactly how many million gallons of recycled Miami-Dade sewage, plus backup from the underground Biscayne aquifer going out into Biscayne Bay should that recycled sewage not be available. This is not on the top of my agenda, but I was quoted in an article in News 10 in the summer of 2014, I guess when the algae breaks came out. Somebody said, why don't you call them up and get a comment? And I mentioned the fact that it seemed to be common knowledge that the high salinity, the heavy, hot water in those cooling canals, which originally, before the cooling canals were built, by the way, were going directly out into Biscayne Bay. So those cooling canals were built to solve a problem, and now they're a problem. But it kind of indicates also the lack of foresight in creating a project like that in this sensitive location. But nevertheless, the reactors are there right now. They're working. It is what it is. But when I quoted, or when I said to the newspaper person that the salt water is sinking down into the aquifer, the response from FPNL was, no, that's not happening. In fact, that there's no connection between the hot, salty water in those cooling canals and the underground aquifer, nor is there any connection to Biscayne Bay. If you talk to a geologist about limestone, they'll say that's impossible. Where do you have this impervious barrier between the cooling canals and Biscayne Bay and the Biscayne aquifer? That's not happening. So I think that one thing that the Commission could ask for is clarity from the company. What is going on between the Biscayne aquifer and these cooling canals? When I contacted the USGS service to find out what research they had done, they said, we did do a study. We did in cooperation with FPNL. Therefore, I said, well, what were the findings? They said, we can't release that. We can't tell you what we actually found, whether there is a connection or not. So I think the public needs to know clearly, if you can get that data and interpret it from USGS, say what's going on. Are these cooling canals interacting with the Biscayne aquifer? To what extent? Also, algicides were used in those cooling canals. What algicides were used? What impacts are these algicides having on the wildlife in those cooling canals? There's a lot of clarity. There's a lot of information that the public should have before you commissioners should be making these kinds of decisions, so we can actually comment correctly and intelligently on it. Secondly, I mean, this is just an obvious problem that was not thought out. When you're being asked to provide a consumptive use permit for the two new reactors they want to build, that's going to be dispersing steam from recycled sewage, which will not be perfectly clean. This is the kind of thing you need to look at before the decision is made, so we don't end up in this situation. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Next up.
Good afternoon. My name is Ed Swakon. I'm president of EAS Engineering. I'm also here on behalf of Atlantic Civil in opposition to the request today. I'd like to yield my time to Steve Walker.
Thank you.
Steve Walker.
You're the guy we keep hearing about.
I'm the one.
Welcome.
And she's passing out some overheads for you just to look at. And I apologize for not being able to have them on the overhead for you. We also are asking you to press the pause button on this. Sharon mentioned all the meetings that have been in coordinations. We've been involved in exactly one, and that was yesterday at the invitation of Tropical Audubon. So we don't feel like we've been coordinated with at all on this issue. But yet we've been an active players in this arena for at least 10 years. In 2009, I stood before this board. I don't believe any of you were on the board at that time. And the issue we were raising was a concern over saltwater intrusion. My client, Atlantic Civil, owns significant lime rock mining operations in South Dade County, approximately 5 miles west of these cooling canal systems. And in 2009, when I presented to your board then, the saltwater front had moved approximately a mile between 2001 and 2009. Stand here before you today, it's moved another 3/4 of a mile. Now, you anticipated this in the 70s when you entered into your first agreement with Florida Power and Light, and that agreement required them to not create more saltwater intrusion than would have occurred had they not been there. And that has been violated and violated and violated for the 50 years since that agreement was entered into. And in 2009, we pointed it out to you. We're pointing it out to you today that it continues. And the biggest issue that we have with today's proposal is you didn't hear one word from your staff about how this might affect saltwater intrusion. Not one word. And as a result, it's the kind of fragmentation of analysis that occurs when you're just looking at addressing one party's issues and not all parties' issues. Sharon talked about the short-term. If you look on the first map, you'll see the little red dot, the little red arrow. That's where the saltwater intrusion is now. It's about a quarter-mile east of our western boundary. So it's moved 1.75 miles basically since 2001 towards us. And if you look at the second and third slides, the second one is a graph showing the monitoring data at that well and how since September of 2013 it's progressively increased as the front moves through that area, heading towards our property. And the fourth slide is one that shows just that little dot well, where that is in relation to our property. The cleared areas you see there, that's the Atlantic Civil property. Sharon mentioned that there are no freshwater inputs into the cooling canal system, and frankly, there are freshwater inputs, and they're contemplated as part of the fifth supplement agreement, which is the agreement you have with them covering the saltwater intrusion issue in this area. They're allowed to pump out of the Interceptor Canal, and for the last several years, they've been pumping about $3.5 million gallons a day on average into the cooling canal system from L-31, from the Interceptor Canal or Interceptor ditch into the cooling canals to create a little gradient between L-31, but they're pumping fresh water in there. They're also letting approximately 14 million, almost 13.5 million gallons a day out of the model lands down into the Everglades mitigation bank. And the fifth slide shows that. I apologize for the tiny print. There's a lot going on in this basin about how water is moving around, but we keep incrementally looking at pieces of it and not looking at it holistically. And the net result is the salt continues to march west towards us. Sharon mentioned the 14 MGD and the modeling that was done to support that. The next to last slide shows that. And if you see the red line is a transect between the cooling canal to the west, to the east, and then going west. There are three black lines on that line. The one on the far left-hand side, that's what would happen without the 14 million gallons a day, as projected by the district's model. The next one to the right is the one that would be with the 14 million gallons a day. So basically, it moves it from the western edge of our property to the middle of our property. We're still not protected. Our uses of water, our uses of our property will still be significantly adversely affected with that 14 MG. It's not enough. It's not a solution. So what do we want? We want today's action to be postponed. It's not an emergency, and you're not under any permitting deadlines because it's being treated as an order. We'd like to see FPL with the district and the affected stakeholders develop a comprehensive solution, one that addresses the saltwater intrusion issue, one that addresses the Biscayne Bay issue, and one that addresses the salinity and temperature problems within the cooling canal system. They have a right to address their issues, but not to the exclusion of other problems that they create when they try to do that. That's your job, is to make sure that everybody's interests are protected as we move forward here. We'd like to take all these incremental changes, how that whole water system is working down there. We'd like to see them come up with a comprehensive solution that addresses not just their short-term issues, but our long-term and perhaps permanent issues. If you enforce the provisions of the fifth supplement, basically calling for no more saltwater intrusion than would have occurred had their canals not been there, we wouldn't be having any of these problems. But unfortunately, that kind of enforcement hasn't happened in the past. We would look forward today to see for more of it in the future. I would like to conclude with my remarks. We have technical people here. If you need any technical support, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much. Further public comment?
Yes, our last one is Brian Karlstrom.
Brian, good afternoon. Welcome.
Good afternoon, Chairman O'Keefe and members of the board. Pleasure to be before you again, although I honestly wish it were under different circumstances. I just want to remind the board that Turkey Point Power Plant is immediately adjacent to and has the distinction of being the only national park adjacent to a nuclear power plant. So we've got that to contend with. And the 40-year history of the cooling canal system is a concern for us because right now it's not working properly. And last September I was before you and was very concerned about the precedent-setting action of the emergency order that was issued. Well, here I am again. You know, the Turkey Point power plant complex provides power for Miami. That's obvious. It needs to continue to do so. But the cooling canal system, the way it's operating right now, needs a lot of help. One of the things that we asked for last September, and I believe at least a couple members of the board mentioned this in their questions, were a potential independent analysis of what's going on there to determine the full extent of that. I'm concerned about the continued ecological integrity of Biscayne Bay and Biscayne National Park. It's thirsty. It needs all the fresh water it can get. Right now, the board, the district, considers anything above and beyond wasting the tide. That's really not the case for Biscayne National Park. It may be true in other areas that the district manages, but in this case of Biscayne Bay and Biscayne National Park, that's not wasting the tide. That's fresh water quenching the ecological need and providing for the ecological integrity of that national treasure. That's a very important distinction. We're working hard with the staff to further codify. You know, I could go on and on. I won't. A lot's already been said here. I just want to see that we can move forward towards finding a long-term solution on this. 2 years is much better than 20. We're not completely opposing this order, although we still have a lot of ongoing concerns that we're carrying forward with this. I want to acknowledge all the hard work that Sharon and the staff has done with the Park Service, with other entities towards this point. I'm not sure we're quite there yet, but I would also like to ask that the board consider a presentation by some of the experts with the South Florida Science Resource Center to provide an overall view, again, on the water quality and quantity needs for Biscayne Bay and Biscayne National Park. We've done that before the board before, but it's several years ago and there's been some turnover. I respectfully ask that that opportunity might be provided at some point in the future. With that, I'd like to close. And once again, thanks to all the staff and all the work that's been done on this issue to date. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Brian. That's it on public comment? Okay. Any further board comment or questions regarding this? Any comments for staff or Ms. Batchelor?
I'd like to kindly request that staff implement what the superintendent asked. I think it would be very helpful to all of us and to the stakeholders. Thank you.
Sandy, I agree. I think that would be helpful to give us another update on that and make sure that everybody's fully informed of those important issues. Mr. Hutchcraft?
I want to thank staff because I think there has been a lot of effort put into this to communicate with the stakeholders and to make sure that we do this as narrowly as possible. I think the last time this issue was before us, I made the comment that I was concerned with repeated ongoing temporary solutions. I think this is a narrow one. But it does seem like the problem has been there for a while, and we're not seeing, significant movement in it. I would like to hear from FP&L. Let's have a conversation about what are we going to do, how are we going to do it, and what's the plan. I think we want to have the power plant there. We want to generate electricity. We want to see it be done in an appropriate manner. But I think we need to have some focused attention on solving this problem so that it doesn't continue to get worse. And so I'm comfortable that this is narrowly drafted and has sufficient constraints in place. But I agree with Ms. Batchelor that we need to have a rigorous conversation about this so that we begin to see a change in a different direction.
Further board comment?
Mr. Chair, I'm sorry. I had a card here for Matt. Matt, he just said if there were questions, so I wasn't sure if he wanted to speak.
Matt Raffenberg, Florida Power and Light. Good afternoon, Board. Good to see everybody. You had a couple questions. You said you'd like the FPL to speak. I think Sharon and staff did a great job working with us. I think we disagree with a lot of what was said today. It's made out to be that this was, we're kind of running emergency mode. Last year was clearly emergency. The salinity spiked in the cooling canals. It was something that hadn't gone up like that in the past. We were already engaged with the district and other agencies working. We have collected at that point 5 years of data. In fact, on the cooling canals, on the groundwater, on the region, on the ecology in the bay, that data is out there. It's transparent. Everybody can look at it. So those data are there. We had received a letter from the district over a year ago to address some of the salinity issues that were mentioned within the groundwater. That is why we moved forward with putting in an application for Florida and aquifer wells. As Sharon said, that has been challenged. And there's no certainty when that's going to come out of the hearing process. Then once it's out of the hearing process, it could take 7 months or so to drill those wells. So we saw the benefit last year that the L-31 had, and we were in emergency mode. So that's why we put this application in requesting the water for this 2 years. We think that should get us through this period, this challenge period, and allow the Florida wells to be in place. We are also doing other ongoing maintenance of our cooling canals to improve the flow through the system. It's essentially a big in-ground radiator, and so we're improving the flow through there. So we're taking a lot of measures at our site to improve the quality of that system. Hope that answers some of the questions you had.
I appreciate your comments. I'd like to continue to hear success as we go forward, and so I appreciate that you're moving forward with the long-term solution. But I think that it is appropriate to expect that we begin to see a reversal of that trend. And so that's something that I look forward to continuing to work with staff and FP&L to make sure of. And I think advancing this is appropriate, but I wanted to make sure that FP&L had at least heard from me that I want to make sure that we begin implementing the resolution to the problem.
You're loud clear.
Thank you. Mitch, I agree, and I see a lot of heads nodding over here, and I do think that this 2-year order is appropriate and more appropriate than a 20-year order, so that this comes back to us and we have an ongoing dialogue and involvement in making sure that there's a long-term solution there, because there are many factors of it, that some of which have been raised today, that are very concerning.
Yeah, I agree with everything that's been spoken, and I just, in that, don't want to wait until outside of between 12 and the 24th month. I want to see, I would like to see the frequency increase in the, quarterly. However, we have to do that to know that it's not continuing to be pushed down the road.
Okay. If there's no further board comment, then call the question. Is there a motion?
I'll move staff recommendation.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? If not, all those in favor of the staff recommendation in the order, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. And staff, if you can just make sure that we follow up with the items that were requested by the various board members. Thank you. Thank you, Sharon. All right, Richard, agenda item 34.
Good afternoon, board members. It's been a long